cutting across live to the live visuals coming from Washington, D.C., where the squad of European Union leaders are now entering the White House ahead of the high-stakes Trump-Zelensky meet, after which, of course, a multilateral meeting will take place between Trump, Zelensky and the European leaders. These are the live visuals. The red carpet has been put over. All eyes on high-stakes Trump-Zelensky meeting. Live visuals from the White House, where the European leaders are now entering before the high-stakes meeting. We have the United Kingdom Prime Minister Keir Starmer, German Chancellor Friedrich Merz, French President Emmanuel Macron, European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen, and even NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte, who in just a short while from now will be entering the White House ahead of the high-stakes meeting between Trump and Zelensky. Of course, the European Union leaders are standing firmly behind Zelensky before the meeting between Trump and Zelensky, with the focus, of course, on ending the war in Ukraine and to ensure that an impartial deal is secured when Trump and Zelensky meet in the White House in just a short while from now. And we're getting you the live visuals from the White House. The stage is all set for the high-stakes meeting between Trump and Zelensky, after which a multilateral meeting will be followed with the European leaders, a whole squad of European leaders out there backing the Ukrainian president before he meets Trump to end the war in Ukraine. And that's the EU chief, Ursula von der Leyen, who is now being greeted by the White House officials as she enters the White House. In just a short while from now, EU leaders are arriving at the White House to meet Trump and Zelensky ahead of the high-stakes meeting. These are the live visuals from the White House. Of course, the focus of the meeting will be on ending the war in Ukraine. And to talk more on this, we have with us our correspondent Susan Tehrani joining us. Susan, talk to us about how significant and how unusual is this with the European leaders converging at the White House, backing Zelensky before the high-stakes meet between the U.S. president and the Ukrainian president.
Right, a very significant meeting indeed, possibly one of the most significant since the end of the Cold War, not only among European leaders and the U.S. president, but also just meeting of NATO and NATO member states in general. Just how high stake this is, we can really go back to just a few days ago, that summit between the Russian president and President Trump, where we'll get more details about what really happened behind closed doors, hopefully. But no one really knows exactly what was said and agreed upon until now. And European leaders embarking in Washington, D.C., along with Volodymyr Zelensky, of course, despite the fact that they've talked to the U.S. president, they're really going to get a better understanding on where Russia stands. And they want to also convey their concerns and how far Ukraine is willing to go in trying to find some kind of a peaceful and negotiated settlement. Remember, the majority of the Ukrainian people in latest polls say that they really do want some kind of peaceful settlement to this conflict. Now, what the merits of that resolution is, that's, the big question. And I think we'll get a better understanding of that. But nonetheless, we also can't deny that NATO has never been stronger before because of President Trump. NATO member states are now contributing a lot more of their defense GDP to NATO as a collective. They seem united in how they want to protect Europe and how much they're willing to back Ukraine. But nonetheless, there is that concern that perhaps they didn't want to send Volodymyr Zelensky alone to Washington, D.C., in case they would be kept out of the loop if Zelensky agreed to some terms that the U.S. president would put forth on the part of Russia. So it's very interesting. The developments are very interesting. You can tell how high stakes and how concerned Europe is by Emmanuel Macron, the French president's recent statement saying any other way but unity going into these negotiations on the part of Ukraine and, of course, Europe and, of course, the United States against Russia would definitely be to Russia's benefit. So they are working and trying very hard, at least on the surface, to present a united stance, not only to Russia, but to the world that's watching.
Right, Susan, we just had the UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer walking the red carpet into the White House, and earlier we had the EU Chief Ursula von der Leyen and the NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte also arriving there before the high-stakes meeting. A clear, like you mentioned, extraordinary show of diplomatic muscle ahead of the expected meeting. I also want to talk to you about the fact that will the EU leaders be able to convince Trump at this point of time, because we saw what happened in February when Trump and Zelensky met and how there was a clear showdown, because before the meeting Trump has clearly said that no NATO membership and that Ukraine has to give up on Crimea as well. So the question right now is that will the squad of the 7 EU leaders will be able to convince Trump?
So that's a really good question, but I think in context and just looking back big picture, we have to really see whether or not actions speak louder than words when it comes to Europe and dealing with Ukraine. Despite the fact that they have time and again sort of embraced this in their comments that Ukraine should be part of NATO, they've really been dragging their foot themselves. I mean, you really don't see European countries with a paper and a pen ready for Ukraine to come on board Ukraine and sign that agreement, because they know what it entails and they know what will happen, notably that Article 5 security in the NATO clause, well, where an attack on one country is an attack on others, they would have to get involved in the war. Those are, so the Europeans do say that, they're in the long run, one day maybe they're open to Ukraine joining NATO. But when you look at